Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast. In the off-season, continues, but the IndyCar Podcast always continues. There's no breaks here. So, looking forward to this week. We've got a bit of a different episode planned. We've reached out to you on Twitter, we've reached out to you on Instagram, and we've asked IndyCar fans from around the world for their controversial IndyCar opinions, and we're going to be reacting to them for the next hour or so. So a lot of varied opinions, a lot of interesting ones, and there'll be plenty to chat about. So let's absolutely crack on. And let's get with a first one. So what should we do? Let's say... what do we go for? Let's go for this one. IndyCar can't be considered a major championship as it's only based in the United States and is international status to be considered a major series. Thoughts?
I would personally say I disagree on this. I think the identity of IndyCar is as a North American championship that kind of helps it to stand out. There's such a diverse range of tracks in the US, and I think if you went abroad and started racing internationally, you'd kind of risk just not using that same diverse range of tracks. You know, you'd maybe end up going to the same ones that F1 drive on. I think if you went international, you'd have to use some unique tracks, because at the end of the day in the States, and obviously there's Toronto as well, but IndyCar races on all different types of tracks. Even you look at the road and street courses, they're all, you know, they're kind of different to one another. Then obviously you have the ovals. I kind of feel like if it branched out, then maybe some of the uniqueness might be lost. I think it's also kind of implausible financially with IndyCar as it is at the moment. I think that's why maybe we've not had as many international races, because for teams it's quite hard to get sponsors for races that you just get US sponsors, especially for the smaller teams. I think maybe overseas races are needed to push the growth of the series going international. But at the end of the day, IndyCar is special because of what it is and the tracks it visits at the moment. And yes, it's a shame that fans across the globe don't get to attend races, and that's why I feel like some international races are needed. You know, you've got Argentina possibly on the cards, but yeah, I think for now maybe the priority should be to just grow the TV audience, for instance, you know, for IndyCar as it is now, to show the world what it is now. And yeah, I mean, this is a tough one. I mean, we would obviously love to see a race in the UK, but I think my fear would be that it would almost lose its core if it branched out away from the US.
Yeah, I do agree with you a lot there, because if it branched out from the US, you only feel IndyCar will lose a lot of its identity. Sort of maybe like, you know, the one or two odd races a year. You know, a trip to Argentina would be nice as an example. But if you are expanding internationally, going to Europe, going to South America, going to Asia, what makes it wildly different to F1? It loses a lot of its uniqueness. And yes, sort of the lack of international races is preventing fan base growth, but it's not as easy as that. It doesn't have the foundations to build upon just yet, and we've kind of established how much effort it is to get it only to Argentina. What's it going to be like if you're going everywhere around the world? There isn't quite the infrastructure yet for that to work, but it is a lot to do with identity. And even in America's such a diverse country. You know, we've got some races which can be freezing cold temperatures. We've got some which are as warm as anything. You know, we're going to go to the thermal, and who knows how hot that's going to be. So it's just because it's based in one country. Yes, you don't quite get the international audience, but the diversity of the series is as strong as anything else, as strong as any other motorsport in the world.
I agree as well. I think the only thing that would be letting it down is kind of how it's advertised and kind of how it reached internationally. But the IndyCar is based on being like an American series and stuff like that. And also, I feel like if it kind of expanded internationally, then it'd lose how kind of like intimate it feels in a way. Like, I feel like it'd start branching out, and then we wouldn't be able to kind of see some of the sides of like the IndyCar drivers that we would be able to see now. I feel like maybe if it also expands, then maybe the drivers will have more have more PR training, which then kind of makes it feel kind of more like F1 and kind of more like the other series than it feels. I don't know how to explain it properly. Right now, it feels more like we can be friends with them all. But then I feel like when it goes too internationally, then it'll kind of take away from that, and it'll kind of take away from what makes the series like special.
There's not many international championships around. There's all the FIA ones, Formula One, Formula E. Those are the only single seaters you've got, and then you've got the World Endurance Championship and the World Rally Championship, which obviously are completely different kettle of fish. And is IndyCar the second biggest series in the world? Is it bigger than Formula E? Maybe not, but you wouldn't say it's miles off. I think for a Formula One team, you look at IndyCar more favourably than you look at Formula E as a comparison. So I think it's wrong to say it can't be considered a major championship, because it absolutely is. It tests the skill set of drivers to the biggest degree, and it tests it like no other series. But you also bring in these people from internationally, and that's what we've mentioned before. You've got McLaughlin from Australian supercars, you've got Canapino from Argentine touring cars, you've got people from Grosjean, people like Grosjean from F1. The diversity is immense, and although it's based in the United States, the sort of reach it can get is to an international degree.
I think you're right. It already is a major series. I think the location doesn't necessarily matter, because at the end of the day, only a minority of fans will end up attending races anyway. And I think the thing that should determine whether it's a major championship is, at the end of the day, as you say, the pedigree of the drivers, the quality of the racing. And as we might come on to, points in this episode, the racing in IndyCar is kind of as good as you can get. And I think that's what should make it a major championship, not where it races, because I think at the end of the day, racing solely in the US, it's a good level of different. It's not just like another one of these, just not like F1, for instance.
You get a lot of samey trucks in F1, whilst you don't feel like there's that in IndyCar at all.
For sure. I completely agree.
Right, so that's that one done. So that's a no from us. We'll count up how many we agree with. I think some are less controversial than others. Let's stick internationally. The sport should be telecast internationally and not stuck behind a paywall. I'll kick off for this one. It's just not as easy as that, unfortunately. The funding's got to come in somewhere. NBC have a contract with the series, and they've got to make their money back on it, because it's not exactly cheap. There is another point in NBC which we'll get onto later. But looking at an international standpoint, it isn't easy. Everyone's really going off the NBC feed, as we learn in the UK, and it's also a lot about demand, really. If you look at somewhere like Asia, there's not really any Asian drivers to follow, so there's no real demand to do it. So if you're a television company in, let's say, China or Japan or India, there isn't really much benefit to you from a viewership perspective. Yes, in some countries like Argentina, it's absolutely beneficial to do it, but you've got to think about sort of the cost for an organizer to run to broadcast IndyCar.
I think I'll address the second point about paywalls first, just by the fact that that's just a sport issue. That's not necessarily an IndyCar problem, because broadcasters, series, they need money at the end of the day, and in order to make money, paywalls are inevitable. Money is what this all kind of revolves around, really. Yeah, maybe wider international broadcasting could be a trick that IndyCar is missing. You have countries such as India who cannot watch IndyCar despite the enthusiasm towards motorsport and the, exponentially growing F1 fandom there.
But then again, in India, the races must be at about 2 or 3 a.m. So that's another good point. Get there?
That's another good point. It needs to be considered at the end of the day, because again, it's all about profit, and how profitable would it be really if these people aren't going to be able to watch the races live anyway? And I think, maybe it's not fair that they're restricted to watching highlights, but IndyCar does an excellent job with sort of showing extended highlights packages. They put old races in full on YouTube fairly frequently. So maybe if deals that are profitable can be struck, then go ahead, and they can expand. It would definitely aid the growth of IndyCar. However, as we've said, it's just about money and whether it is really worthwhile for them.
I think as well, in our that interview with Tom Gilmore, he was saying how kind of it all depends on the structure and like schedule of the other sports. Kind of when IndyCar is on, I can't remember what series it is.
NBA, NFL's the main one, their main issue.
Mm-hmm. So like when they're on, then IndyCar can't be kind of like televised and that. I think as fans, especially as like British fans, we would love for it to be able to kind of be more international. But it's kind of like what you guys are saying. It's harder than it seems. It's not something that can just, I don't know, be said to be done and then all of a sudden it's on the screens. It's not like that. There's a lot kind of behind the scenes that need to be worked out, and there's a lot of deals, and it's just kind of to put IndyCar on, it's sacrificing something else. So it's making sure that IndyCar's kind of the better choice in that situation, which can be harder. So.
Perfect. Let's move on to the next one. Let's go to a slightly different kettle of fish. Let's go for this one. We'll do a bit of tracks for the bit. Texas is the best track. Well, it says on the schedule. We'll say the best track on the 2023 schedule.
I mean, we've spoken about it a lot, haven't we? That it was essentially the best race of 2023. The racing there was almost turning into pack racing latterly. It was incredible, the amount of grooves that were open for the drivers to, go up high, run low. There was a hell of a lot of passing. There's not a foregone conclusion that there will be passing on ovals. Obviously, it's a short oval, not super speedway, but gateways, notoriously a bit difficult to pass. Cautions helped to an extent, but it went down to the wire again at Texas, and for the second successive year, I know this year was a considerably better race, but we were unfortunately denied another really close finish in the end by that late caution as Grosjean crashed. But yeah, the intention does seem for it to be return. I think unfortunately there are the clashes with NASCAR, and it's hard to shoehorn it into the schedule with the Olympics as well this year. But I think one thing that was an issue with Texas was the fact that attendances were waning a little bit, and that is an issue going forward. It's not a great look for IndyCar, is it, if there are empty grandstands? But yeah, racing-wise, there's no doubt it should return. Whether it's the best track on the schedule, I think that can probably be debated. I think
bit of an insult to Indianapolis, no?
Yeah, and I think there are also some road courses. It's quite hard to compare, ovals with the road courses, the street courses. So yeah, I think there are obviously road courses that maybe you could argue are better tracks, but in terms of the racing it provided, especially this year, it was phenomenal. But yeah, best track on the schedule, possibly not, especially when you've got Indianapolis.
I think it's one which you'd like to see on the schedule, but there wasn't. People were disappointed, but it wasn't a major outcry. I don't think. I think there's a few tracks where there would be that sort of major outcry. Maybe Long Beach would be one as an example. I'm trying to think of any other tracks that people would be unhappy at. Where else would people be unhappy at if it got removed? St. Pete's?
Yeah, I suppose you've got the likes of Road America, Laguna Seca, of course.
Yeah, it should be on the schedule, but I think the best track is a bit far-fetched.
I don't really have anything else to add on other than what Gary said. I think it's a really good track in terms of like kind of what we saw this year in the racing. But it's kind of up to interpretation as to whether it's the best track. So
absolutely. Let's stick with some tracks for the next bit next bit. Long Beach is the only good street circuit on the calendar. This is an interesting one. So Long Beach is one of 5 street tracks. We've got St. Pete's, Detroit, Nashville, and Toronto.
Yeah, so I personally disagree that it's the only good street track. It might be the best street track, but the most prestigious as well. But the way IndyCar is, you kind of feel all of the street tracks provide good racing. Obviously Nashville had its issues in the past, and I'm interested to see the new layout. But 2023 showed it won't always be messy, and the race went kind of right down to the wire as well. I know we did have late cautions, but the races are good. St. Pete was unfortunately a bit of a crash fest. Not a great look this year, but still sort of transpired into a hard-fought race. And even amid the crash fest, you had Grosjean, McLaughlin battling hard. I think the new Detroit layout actually proved to be a little bit better than expected. Toronto's also decent as a racetrack. So, yeah, I mean, there is the issue that sometimes when you're racing on streets, there are maybe a few too many 90-degree corners. But to be honest, IndyCar can race anywhere. Look at how bumpy that new Detroit track was. But the cars are very strong, and they can get around these sort of tracks. They're nimble enough, and I think it's testament to the racing product that IndyCar puts on that they can get around these tracks. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there was a track on the schedule that really stands out to me as not being a track that you're unhappy. There's not a track that I would say I'm unhappy with being on the calendar.
Yeah, I think Nashville might be flirting with danger. To be fair, it wasn't as bad this year. I think the issue was with Nashville was that where you had really cramped bits of racetrack to do restarts was obviously the issue. But it was a bit better this year. I think St. Pete's is a fun track. It's a challenging one for the drivers, obviously with the heat. It is a bit different. It is a bit less bumpy. You sort of got the airport there, which is a cool little feature. Detroit is sort of similar to Nashville in style. I think Nashville's spectacle, especially going into next year, is going to be particularly cool. Detroit's probably my least favourite out of the set. We do need to give more time. Obviously, it was a bit bumpy. The layout is a bit unimaginative in places, but it's got its features like the split pit lane as an example, and you've got Toronto, which is a nice challenge. It's nice, obviously, especially as in a broad round, and it's another. I think Toronto is a nice challenging one. It's a nice one to have sort of mid-season as well, and it's got a weather factor to it amongst other things. So yeah. I mean, I don't mind them. I'm not huge on any other street tracks apart from Long Beach, but I wouldn't say the other ones are bad, per se. Right, let's go to this one. IndyCar should be on the support bill for Formula One when they head to the Circuit of the Americas or Las Vegas.
This is a fascinating suggestion. I mean...
Yes. I mean, first of all, both of them are after the season ends, so that's the first problem we got here.
That's the first stumbling block, and there are a lot of stumbling blocks. But I mean, is this something you've considered before? I mean,
yeah. I've seen it hinted at before.
Yeah,
Does Roger Penske want to play second fiddle to Formula One?
This is a thing. Do you want to look like the little brother and like you?
Because at that point, you admit you're inferior to Formula One. Which,
exactly.
Yes, from a global standpoint, it is, but I don't think IndyCar's as inferior series to Formula One in any way. Apart from sort of global reach and attention.
Yeah. You are trying to differentiate yourself, and by this, you're kind of just saying, as I said, this is the big brother, and we are, as you said, playing second fiddle to it. But, yeah, I mean, IndyCar's very separate from F1. I'm not sure whether... in that way, it would be logistically feasible. I mean, maybe there are a few tensions as well between the series. I know there was the discontent at the branding of Vegas as being a great racing spectacle or whatever they ended up using as the rip-off for greatest spectacle in racing. I mean, it would be major for IndyCar's exposure, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, of the two, which one would you personally say would be the best to support? I mean... I think I would say, obviously, Vegas is the biggest show. Maybe it'd get the most exposure. But if you want to get sort of pure racing fans, I feel like Vegas was obviously all for the show. Then maybe COTA would probably be the best. IndyCar's obviously raced there before.
COTA's favourable. It has raced there. And the racing, that one race was particularly good. People did enjoy it. And there isn't really a track like COTA. It's got, sort of larger runoffs. It's a longer lap. It's got a bigger mix of corners. I think Vegas would be great for exposure and a spectacle, but yeah, I can't really imagine Indy cars down the strip. Not the strip itself, but the length of the strip. It's ridiculously long, and I don't know. I think cars will struggle down there over the course of 2 hours or whatever. And the other thing is, IndyCar races are significantly longer than F1 races. Like, is it really a support package if it's racing for longer? Which is another factor.
Sorry. Then how would that work in terms of like how they would schedule it? Because then, actually, I don't think they do have like two here. But like, if they did, how would that then work? Because then they have to work around all the little, like, all the other series and that. But I don't think they do actually. Do they? Wait.
No support between COTA and Vegas. I think if IndyCar ever hypothetically did it, would be the only one. I think. I don't think I wouldn't want it. I wouldn't want it. I don't think it's a good look on IndyCar just saying, yeah, we'll just follow Formula One because they're the top dogs. Because I don't think IndyCar should market themselves as that in any way.
Yeah, I don't think it would be beneficial enough. Obviously, you'd have the
The only benefit is
but
really the only benefit exposure. Is there any other real plus to IndyCar doing it that way?
I personally don't really see any plus, to be honest. No, I think it would genuinely just be for trying to grow the series, and that would be it. And as you said, IndyCar is only really inferior in terms of the sort of reach it gets when you look at the racing, purely the racing. We'll come on to this, but I know which one I'm taking.
Yeah, I think there's too many issues from a what's the word? From a sort of logical standpoint, there's too many issues. But I think we're living in fantasy land. I just don't think it's beneficial enough for IndyCar. I don't think the exposure is as good as all the drawbacks that we've mentioned.
Yeah, I feel like it just kind of, if they were to be on at the same time, I feel like it'd be dismissed a little bit as well. Just like how what we said, maybe they get like a few more fans here and there, but then I don't think it'd be worth it.
This leads us on very nicely, actually, to our next point, which IndyCar is significantly better racing than F1. I don't think this is unpopular in the slightest. I think from a racing standpoint, we've seen the overtake numbers in the last 2 years or whatever have been absolutely ridiculous. The unpredictability as well is particularly pertinent now. You're looking at the Formula One results, and I don't think there's an argument to be made here from anyone who's watched one race of both series.
Yeah, I mean, I think this would only be controversial in the eyes of fans who maybe know about F1 or are F1 fans and don't know about IndyCar, because for me it's unarguable that IndyCar does have significantly better racing in F1. I mean, as we've mentioned, passing is possible even on the tightest of street courses. Passes for position, it's at the very least almost 200 every single road or street course race. It's regularly even more than 200, getting to 300-400. I mean, it almost always trumps the most overtakes we've ever had in an F1 race. And then, of course, you have ovals, which is a little bit different, but I think the Iowa races this year had around 1,500 overtakes in each. I think, obviously, that includes passing lap cars, but that's all part of the spectacle on ovals. I mean, yeah, there's so many factors: tire wear, managing your push to pass, the sort of way more strategies that there are as well than your kind of ordinary strategies in F1. I mean,
Even
the cars are robust enough to really go wheel to wheel. You can pass in places you'd never really think of passing. Yeah, it helps that it's partially a spec series, but that's only evidence of the fact that there is less of a development race, and instead it's all on track, which just enhances the racing product and the on-track action. So, yeah, I think it's unarguable, really, that IndyCar is a better racing product.
IndyCar as well, just kind of, it keeps you more like on the edge of your seat, and it kind of it makes you kind of more entertained. So sometimes if it is like early in the morning or whatever, then you don't feel as tired in a way, because you're more like you're more entertained by what you're watching, so you kind of don't notice the time in a way sometimes. But I can, it's kind of like, I can understand why people may say it in a way, but I think unless you've kind of watched them both, you'd understand that kind of IndyCar has a lot more factors and variables that can be changed that in the end makes it more exciting and unpredictable, which is kind of what you want to see in racing. You don't want to be sat there and you don't want to know who's going to win before the race has even started. You kind of want to go in and not have an idea and just kind of see the racing and then see how it ends.
I think IndyCar is very off your seat racing. You jump out of your seat some of the action. You look at the last 30 laps at Texas or the last couple of laps of the Indy 500. Sort of the unpredictability at all times is a major factor, and F1 just doesn't really have that. It doesn't have the racing that you feel that makes the crowd go wild as such. Whilst IndyCar does provide that, and it's not a few and far between thing either. It's the other great thing about it is it's hardcore racing. People aren't afraid to budge each other out of the way or give someone a nudge. Whilst in Formula One, you just can't do that. The damage is. Sorry, the lightness of the chassis is just too extreme. Whilst in IndyCar, you have a bit more harder racing, which is what people want to see, and that also contributes to the racing product. So I don't think there's any argument here that IndyCar does a better racing than F1 does.
Yeah, I think it's a good point you make about it really gets you off your seat, because I think there's a lot of F1 races where the most exciting thing happening is the fight for the sort of lower end of the top 10 places or something. And I think it helps at IndyCar. There's points scored for every position. There's always a fight somewhere. Obviously, the incentive of the leaders circle. Yeah, of course, F1 teams want to make their way at the Constructors' Championship, but there's always a battle at the front in IndyCar, and you feel like every position means something. Whereas in F1, it's kind of just the excitement is considerably less. Whereas IndyCar, you almost become swamped by the amount of things that are happening, and I don't think there are many times you can really say that about F1.
Ooh. Well, let's stick on an F1 theme for a bit longer. Colton Herta is not good enough for F1 and should stick to IndyCar. I think that's logical. Alright, Andretti 2025, 2026, obviously he's going to be the first name thrown in the hat. And obviously he was rumored with Alpha Tauri quite significantly, and then previously what was Alfa Romeo. Yeah, I can't feel but only agree in this scenario. Herta hasn't. Well, he has proved himself in IndyCar, but he's sort of getting lost a bit nowadays. And if he's getting lost in the IndyCar pack, you only fear what would the outcome be in Formula One.
Yeah, he hasn't taken off in recent years as his early years promised. I mean, there's a lot of inconsistency with him. Maybe it's a team issue. We've obviously spoken a lot about Andretti. Their issues with not being very consistent, having to downsize to 3 cars, kind of with that in mind. But I think Herta, he's been very incident prone. He would really have to eradicate that. I think there are a lot of parts to his, to his skill set that he will have to refine. I think the drop off in 2023, picking up 1 podium, not winning a race, not all of the onus is on him, but it's certainly a concern, and it makes 2024 a big year. I mean, he was outperformed by Kirkwood, obviously finished ahead of him in the championship, but Kirkwood's peak performance was better. I mean, could he then enter the picture if he continues to outperform Herta, if he does so again in 2024? I think, Herta really has to bounce back next year. He's still young, obviously. He came into IndyCar when he was extremely young, and there's a long time for him to become a more rounded driver. But I think the way in which he quite often struggles to put a good weekend together, only showing pace at certain times, maybe taking pole and falling off a little bit in the race. In F1, you really need to be on it all weekend. But if he bounces back next year, then maybe he does deserve the chance, but it's definitely not a certainty.
Yeah, and I think there's some skills Herta does sort of lack, which I'm an F1 team, which is an opinion. I've said this before, his tyre management at times this year has been pretty awful. There's been times where it's just had to finish a stint. He's 5 seconds off the pace each lap because he's just blown his tyres, and he's still familiar with the odd accident at times, especially in high pressure situations, which is what you don't want. And for an F1 team, there's better options out there. Alex Palou, that's obviously a bit of a mute point as such, but we've had likes of Pato O'Ward dabbling their feet into F1 in recent days. So if I'm Andretti, I don't know what I'd do. I think it would be good for IndyCar, and I think it might be a good look. But then if Herta doesn't do well in Formula One, well, what does it reflect on the series, which is the big point there. So I don't think he's ready for F1 yet. Maybe when Andretti do enter Formula One, or if they enter Formula One, he might be in a better situation then. But at this current time, I don't think it's a particularly feasible or good option if I was Colton.
Yeah, I think you need to be reliable to be an F1 driver, and I think he's yet to prove he is a super, super reliable driver. Obviously, he's one of the fastest in the series, if not the fastest in the series on his day. I mean, you look at, he took a couple of pole positions even amid the struggle that 2023 was. Top 3 in the championship. He finished 3rd in 2020, I think it was, followed by a 5th place. Then came the drop off, but he's clearly supremely talented. But I just don't feel at this stage he's maybe rounded enough and complete enough to be a guarantee for success in F1.
Agreed.
I don't think there's anything else I could add. I feel like it'd be, I don't want to say easy, but it'd be easy for him to kind of go into F1, but I feel like it wouldn't be easy for him to stay in, and that would just reflect badly on like him and kind of on the team and kind of on IndyCar, because on some series you can do well and then like you move to a different one and it doesn't go as well, and I feel like that kind of just reflects badly on the drivers rather than kind of like IndyCar's easier for, I don't want to say improvement, but the opportunity to kind of be greater. F1 is more stick, and like your team like defines kind of more of how you're gonna perform in F1. Like I know it does in every series, but I feel like in F1 you can be a great driver, but if you're not on the right team, then it just won't reflect goodly. It won't reflect good on you.
Let's stick with a driver theme. Let's stick with an Andretti theme. Romain Grosjean is overrated. I mean, I think the big question is, how rated is Romain Grosjean at the minute? Because I don't rate him very highly. I don't know how highly he is rated.
That was exactly what I noted down. I mean, first of all, this opens up a massive can of worms. I think there's a lot of debate to be stirred by this. And yeah, it's hard to give a definitive answer because, as you said, are we really now at a stage where people don't rate him enough for him to be overrated? He's perceived as this crasher, and for some time, really, even lastly in F1, he's been viewed as being accident prone, and he hasn't helped his case during his time at Andretti, has he? So, yeah, he can deliver when he's in the right setting. Coin, maybe now at Juncos, but yeah, while he has the pace riddled by inconsistency. Yeah, I agree. I don't actually feel like he's really held in high enough regard anymore to be considered overrated, because I don't really feel like there's anyone who's particularly complimenting him for the way the last couple of years have gone, whether that be his off-track relationship with the team or his on-track just error-strewn performance. I mean, what was it? Did I say? Was it something like 12 out of 47 races in IndyCar he's retired from?
It's about 25%, something
which was an awful lot, and that is not a great record. So, yeah, we know how good he can be, but he's just been disappointing, I think, in IndyCar away from the first year.
You don't feel his fan base is insignificant now as it was either. Maybe it is because of these performances. And I feel the end of 2021, he was overrated. because he had these stand-up performances, and that's fair enough. People with these stand-up performances will get more hype around them. But these last 2 years, does anyone really like Andretti have placed their trust in to Di Francesco to the same degree they have in Grosjean, almost to some extent, if you look at it that way. And he's finished 12th in the championship in a front-running team. It was lower than that, I think. I can't remember exactly where it was, but he was in a front-running team, and he didn't perform. He was crashing week in, week out, and I don't think anyone, particularly a regular watcher of the series, rates him at all. Really, he's on his day, which is way too far and few between, but he's all right. He's one of the top drivers, but those days aren't consistent enough for us to say he's a driver who's fairly rated or underrated. Cool. Let's stick on with a driver theme for the next one. This one's a bit more of a bolder one. Rinus VeeKay would challenge for the title if he was in a better car.
I mean, I think the simple answer to this is we don't know. I mean, prior to kind of this season, there was interest from top teams, and that's not going to be for no reason. He's clearly coveted in the series, but I think his ECR struggle for performance that kind of sends VeeKay not into anonymity, because he's still spoken about and he still turns up with some strong results, but he's maybe not talked about as much as other drivers. You've got the likes of Malukas obviously getting that move to McLaren, Lundgaard, Eilert, all spoken about a bit more than him. I mean, it's no mean feat winning a race with Ed Carpenter Racing when you consider the struggles they've had. He's been on the podium 4 times, I think, but I mean, no podium in 2023. I guess it kind of just reflects on how well his first 3 years went, that he took at least 1 podium in each of them. But yeah, it's kind of hard to give a definitive answer. There's a lot for VeeKay still to prove, and I think to prove that, he really needs to get a move away from Ed Carpenter Racing, I think, at the end of this year, probably. Otherwise, I do kind of fear he might get stuck a little bit. I think this year, again, down to the car at his disposal more than anything. I think when he does have the equipment, such as during the month of May, he always seems to, deliver fairly well. Qualified inside the top 4 for each of his Indy 500s, I think, 3 successive front rows. So, yeah, it's hard to give an answer. I don't know what you feel about it.
I don't think he's had a real good representation in his career. His only teammates really been Conor Daly and Ryan Hunter-Reay, who I don't think are the sort of the best examples to pitch himself against if he's looking at becoming an IndyCar race winner on a regular basis or an IndyCar champion. I think if he moves to a top team, it's always just going to be someone who I see as better. I don't think he's a better standard than Palou or O'Ward are. I don't think he's better than either Penske's are or Dixon. But I almost feel at the same time is if he was really highly rated, if people saw him as a potential title contender, he would have been snapped up by now. He's going into his 5th year at ECR, and you only start to think by this point, if you really were something, people would be latching onto you. Elias Lundqvist only needed 3 races to prove it, as an example that Chip Ganassi is the faith that he could be a race winner or a title contender. So I probably lean towards no, he wouldn't, because the way his IndyCar career's panned out. I think he'd do a respectable job. I can't see him contending for the title. One when considered the people he's up against, and 2 kind of his very average track record over his 4 IndyCar series years.
I feel like obviously if he had a better car, then he'd maybe be challenging for wins, but I don't see how he would be challenging for like the championship title. I don't know, but I didn't watch how he was racing before, so maybe this was like just a bad season for him. But just kind of watching how he was this season, I feel like he'd have his moments of winning and kind of like getting on the podium, but I don't think it would be like title worth.
Yeah, I think you have to consider the competition, and when you have obviously the likes of Palou, and then the upcoming likes of, you've got Kirkwood, you've obviously got Herta, you've got the Penskes. The list just goes on. It would probably take quite something for VeeKay to reign supreme above them. You never know, but yeah, I think it's a long shot, but yeah, it's just he's one of the hardest drivers in the series to judge, really, because as you said, he's not really had a marker to go up against as such, and yeah, it'd be good to see him get a move away just to maybe get a better gauge.
I think for VeeKay, it is a now or never year to prove yourself, because I don't think if he repeats what he did this year, I don't think anyone's going to be snapping him up for a big seat looking towards 2024. There are better options. I don't think he has beaten Daly and Hunter Ray in the seasons he's gone against them, but you wouldn't say he's absolutely trounced them, absolutely wiped the floor against them, which I think is what he needs to be doing, sort of that standard. There's obviously Rasmussen coming in next year. I think the expectation is he should comfortably beat him. But we'll see what happens there. I don't think he's going to be challenging for titles in the top car, but if he does want that top car, this has got to be his year.
Yeah, this could be a better measure going up against Rasmussen, reigning in the next champion. If he gets outperformed by a rookie, it could be bad news for him. And I think his hopes of landing a top seat for sure.
Right, let's go to this one. Last year's Indy 500 restart was a farcical decision. Thoughts?
Whoa, yeah, there's a lot to kind of unpick here, isn't there, really? It's the remit of the series to try and finish under a green flag.
It always has been, isn't it?
It doesn't look great if the biggest race ends with the drivers not actually racing. I mean, you have Tony Kanaan when he won it, he crossed the line under a caution. It can be it can be a farcical look when there are so many red flags. I think the red flag issue is possibly a more pertinent one. There was quite a lot of red flags for all the incidents late on, but it kind of just links back to the desperation of drivers to get to the front and have a shot at winning the Indy 500. But I don't think you can necessarily say by any means it was manipulated. I mean, abandonment of procedures is something that does exist. Are there a lot of hypotheticals flagged amid it? I mean, you had Ericsson speaking about, tyre temperature not being up to scratch and being dangerous, but they remained hypotheticals. None of those proved issues. It was the cleanest restart they had for a few restarts. Yeah, you can understand why it looks dodgy. You'd usually have that further lap out of the pits, but yeah, you want to finish under green and allow racing until the death. You want to race as much as you can and cross the yard of bricks racing. It's just, I think for Ericsson, it was unfortunate that as the leader, your chances do diminish massively if you are leading and there's only one lap. So I wouldn't say it was farcical. I think it was a complicated decision. I think it was just a complicated situation, but I understand completely why they did what they did.
I think as well, if it did end on like a yellow flag or kind of how it was with before the restart, I think people would be kind of saying stuff about that decision as well. I feel like we talked about this kind of before, but there's no winning in terms of it because they have to make these decisions in the moment. And sometimes it can be kind of a bad one, but I feel like in this way it wasn't. I think everyone, even the drivers, would rather finish under a green flag. Maybe not Ericsson in this matter, but I think everyone would prefer it under a green flag. So it kind of, I don't know. I don't think it was the way that they say it, but I can understand why people would be upset about it. But I can also understand why they would do it.
Well, here's a question: does situations like this mean IndyCar should use something similar to NASCAR overtime?
No.
To always end something under a green?
Absolutely not, I don't think.
No.
I think it's too much that's where you become too much for the show. I don't agree with the whole overtime thing personally. I think that's where it becomes slightly too much. Obviously, there is an aspect of it. It is for the fans, and it is, these people do race for the fans, but at the same time, you want to keep that sporting integrity, and I feel like overtime's just a little bit too much.
Right. Interesting. I mean, I think the 500 you want to end under green. You feel like if it wasn't the 500, that wouldn't have happened.
That's true, because this is the race that fans who maybe don't know about IndyCar, you have people watching the Indy 500 who don't know it races aside from it.
It sort of gives. I know this is an extreme scenario, but Abu Dhabi 2021 sort of a situation where this is the biggest race of your year. This is the one where people have got their eyes on you. You don't want it to end under you don't want to have an anticlimactic ending to end one of the biggest events in the world in both cases. So you kind of you see why they've done it, and I think it wasn't wildly unfair. I think maybe Ericsson, because he was unfortunate, but then again he's had his time in the Indy 500. It's not like it's been nicked from him from a first-time winner, but I see why they did it. I'm glad they did it. I think it gave us a very memorable ending, and I think TK said it's not a regret, but he wishes it ended under green. And 2020 was the other one that ended under caution in recent years, and you want it to end under green. You want to have that unpredictability right to the flag, because almost every 500 the last decade has had that unpredictability, and you want that to continue. Let's go to, not many more left. We'll go to this one, which is NBC commentary is overrated. Let me get up the full comment. NBC Com's main focus is with Lee and the chaotic moments the crashes create, whereas on most broadcasts they have good info throughout and no ad breaks.
I don't really see where this is coming from. I mean, the ad breaks thing isn't their fault.
No.
I mean, that's just how American TV works, and thankfully we don't have to put up with it. Thanks to Sky Sports and Tom Gaymore. Thanks Tom. I personally think it's very insightful. I think it's a good balance of sort of fun and insight. I don't really have any quibbles with the NBC commentary, to be quite honest.
I think it's quite engaging. I think, whereas most series have two, having three in the commentary box really does well, especially three people who kind of bond off each other so well. They have a laugh in the booth, and you see them do ridiculous things. I've said this many times before, but Townend on a jet ski will always be my favourite. You wouldn't see Crofty on a jet ski somewhere.
I'd like to see it.
I'd like to see it, but Townend on a jet ski during a practice session is something you never quite see. And you got Hinch and Townend arguing over something completely black and white, like did that wheel go over the line, stuff like that. And they're just such an engaging group to follow. They bring a good amount of insight, but they do it in a way which is really enjoyable to listen to, and I think it really contributes to the racing. And I think as a lead commentator, Lee is brilliant at creating excitement, creating anticipation, and the three work so well together. And Townend and James give their brilliant insights, and it all works really well for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's definitely chemistry between them all. And yeah, it works well. I don't see did the comment say something about it not being that insightful or something?
Yeah,
I disagree with that personally. I think, obviously having two former drivers in there with Diff, who is one of the most engaging commentators, and he is always excellent in the big moments. So yeah, I mean, I personally have absolutely no issue with NBC's coverage.
Yeah.
I think as well, it depends on what you see as insightful. Because I think sometimes people, when listening to commentators, they kind of want every second to be filled with like the facts, if that makes sense. Like they want some people want it less engaging and more informational, but I don't see any problem with it. I like it. I think sometimes when it does tell you the facts, they kind of do it in a way that you don't realise, which I find in a good way. It doesn't feel boring, it feels engaging, and yeah, I think it's just personal preference on what you think about them.
Yeah, and I don't think there's many complaints about NBC from what I see. I think they're all pretty good and they're all pretty liked, and Hinch has got a big following in America, and people like him a lot in particular. So I've left this one till last because I think it is the most controversial one, the most confusing one. So we'll go over it. So I'll read the full statement. As an F1 fan, ovals are the most boring races in existence. Long Beach, St. Petersburg, Road America, Barber, and not to mention Laguna Seca, those are super cool tracks that even F1 could benefit from racing at. Ovals are boring. No.
No.
No. No, I'm sorry, no. The first sentence was from an F1 fan, and I think that kind of tells you a lot you need to know. Oval racing is something, once you get into it, it's very difficult to get out of. It's anyone who's got any doubts about oval racing, anyone who thinks oval racing is boring, anyone who thinks oval racing is easy, watch the last 40 laps of Texas this year, because that tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very different discipline of racing to get used to if you are from, I guess, an F1 background, as that comment said. But yeah, as you said, as once you get into it, it is phenomenally enjoyable. I think it's a huge misconception that it isn't, and that it's just driving around in circles. It is so much more than that. I mean, the overtaking you get is, it's overtaking galore. But yeah, this is I understand why it might be to some people boring when they are just getting into it, but honestly, when you are into it or just slightly into it, it is so much more than just drivers going around in circles. You have to be so precise just to stay away from the wall, and the concentration it takes to stay on your line and not hit the wall is pretty astonishing. And so many other factors: managing tire drop off, managing your way around traffic on short ovals. It's all while sustaining these remarkable speeds as well, obviously upwards of 200 miles per hour consistently at the 500. It's something I'm in awe of, really, oval racing, and I think this is a controversial take for a reason.
I think before I kind of got into IndyCar properly, I could agree with it, but now that I've kind of watched a season and kind of watched the races, I totally disagree. I think there's so many more things that kind of go into it than it seems. It kind of seems I can't speak. It seems easy, but then it's not. There's there's tire deg, but there's also like the strategies of, if you pit now, then you're going to be down a couple of laps. But then even if you are down a couple of laps, you can always make your way back up. I think the overtaking is like incredible, but also you have to, like I said, be so precise with where you overtake as well, because 1 second or 1 millisecond, everything's fine, and then all of a sudden you're in a wall. I think it's so much harder than it seems, and I feel like that's kind of what draws you in, because you know that you're like, oh, it's all right for now, but is that all going to change? And I think for the drivers to be able to do that and to kind of race on it, and most of the time it'd be okay, I feel like that's also very incredible and impressive as well to kind of watch.
Yeah, oval racing is fine art. You've got to be more precise than you are of road courses. The barrier's even closer, and you can be wheel to wheel for laps on end, and that's not an easy thing to do as a racing driver. It's a highly underrated form of racing, and the Indy 500 is a great spectacle of racing, and I think that sort of tells you all you need to know about ovals. So there we are. That is your controversial opinions reacted to. please continue to get in touch, whether that's anything, whether it's video ideas, whether that's feedback, anything. We will happily take your comments on board. Please continue to get in touch with us via DM on Instagram and Twitter at Project DiveBomb. Next week is the classic. We don't really know what's going to happen. There might be a driver announcement. There might be a surprise guest. We don't really know. We'll see what comes up this time next week. So stay tuned, as always. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.
And by the time you listen to this, it will be 1 day until it is 100 days until the St. Pete weekend starts.
There we are. How many have we had? 16? Something? 17? 18?
Quite a long time already. We're doing well.
We're almost halfway there. So that's going to be a big milestone ticked off when we're halfway there. So we've made it to the end of November. So we'll see you in December. This is where the real struggle is. But we will get there. So, as I said, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week.